The story I'm about to tell you is real. The names have been changed, but the events happened exactly as I'm describing them. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why this man asked me to share his story. Not for sympathy, but as a warning. Because what happened to him can happen to anyone. And the scariest part isn't what she did to him. It's how long it took him to realize what was happening. It's how invisible the trap was until he was already inside it. This is the story of Daniel. Daniel was 34 when he met her. He was doing well. Stable career in finance. Owned his apartment. Had good friends. Close relationship with his parents. He wasn't desperate. He wasn't lonely. He was just open, ready to meet someone. That's important to understand. Daniel wasn't some broken guy looking for someone to fix him. He wasn't vulnerable in any obvious way. He had his life together. He was confident. He knew his worth. That's part of what makes this story so unsettling. Because if it could happen to him, it could happen to anyone. She was everything he thought he wanted. Confident, warm, intelligent, beautiful in a way that made heads turn. When she focused on you, it felt like being in a spotlight, like you were the most interesting person in the room. Their first few dates were electric. She asked questions about his life, his dreams, his fears. She remembered small details he'd mentioned and brought them up later. She made him feel seen in a way no one had before. Looking back, Daniel says that intensity should have been the first warning sign. But when you're in it, intensity feels like connection. It feels like fate. It feels like finally finding someone who gets you. She shared her own stories, too. Tales of past relationships where she'd been hurt. Men who hadn't appreciated her. A difficult childhood she'd overcome. It made Daniel feel protective, special, like he would be the one to finally treat her the way she deserved. Within 3 weeks, she told him she loved him. Within 2 months, she was pushing for engagement. Why wait, she said, when you know it's right? Daniel's friends thought it was fast. His parents had concerns. His mother especially felt something was off, but couldn't articulate exactly what. But she had an answer for everything. They don't understand what we have. They're just jealous. Do you trust them more than you trust your own feelings? Slowly, subtly, she positioned herself as the only one who truly understood him. And Daniel, swept up in what felt like the love of his life, started to believe it. He proposed at 4 months. They were married at 7. The shift didn't happen overnight. It was gradual. So gradual that Daniel couldn't point to a single moment when things changed. It started with questions. Where had he been? Who was he texting? Why did that meeting run late? At first, he thought it was cute. She cares. She wants to know about my day. But the questions became interrogations. The curiosity became suspicion. If he came home 15 minutes late, she wanted to know every detail of those 15 minutes. If a female colleague's name appeared on his phone, she demanded to see the entire conversation. I just need to feel secure, she told him. If you have nothing to hide, why does it bother you? So Daniel started explaining himself constantly, preemptively. He'd text her updates throughout the day, not because he wanted to, but because he knew the alternative was worse. He stopped having lunch with female coworkers. He declined after-work drinks with friends because he knew the questions that would follow. His world got smaller, but it happened so slowly that he barely noticed. He was just avoiding conflict, keeping the peace, being a good husband. The first time she lost control was over something trivial. Daniel had forgotten to tell her about a work event. Nothing secretive, just a company dinner he'd assumed she wouldn't want to attend. When she found out, something in her snapped. She screamed at him for over an hour, called him a liar, accused him of hiding things, of planning to cheat, of never really loving her. The words were vicious, designed to wound. She threw things, not at him, but near him, close enough to make him flinch. Daniel stood there, stunned. This wasn't the woman he'd married. This was someone he didn't recognize. And then, just as suddenly, it stopped. The rage drained out of her. She collapsed into tears. I'm so sorry, she sobbed. I don't know what came over me. I was just so scared of losing you. Please don't leave me. I'll get help. I promise it won't happen again. Daniel held her, comforted her, told her it was okay because she seemed so genuinely remorseful, because he loved her, because everyone deserves a second chance. He didn't realize then that this was the first turn of a cycle that would repeat dozens of times. Explosion, tears, apology, honeymoon period, building tension, explosion. The honeymoon periods between explosions were almost worse than the explosions themselves. Because during those periods, she was perfect again, loving, attentive. The woman he'd fallen in love with. It made him believe that version of her was the real one, and the raging version was just a temporary glitch. What he didn't understand yet is that both versions were real, and the loving version existed specifically to keep him hooked between episodes of the other. Each time he forgave her, each time she promised it was the last, each time the explosions got worse. Looking back, Daniel can see how systematically she cut him off from everyone. It never felt like isolation while it was happening. It felt like natural relationship prioritization. Of course, you spend more time with your wife than with your friends. Of course, you have to balance family visits. Of course, some friendships fade when you get married. But the pattern was deliberate. His friends were always a problem. They don't respect our relationship. They're a bad influence on you. Why do you need them when you have me? When he'd come home from seeing them, she'd be cold for days. The punishment was never explicit, but it was effective. One by one, he stopped seeing them. It was easier than dealing with her reaction when he did. His parents were worse. She found reasons to start conflicts before every family gathering. A comment his mother had made, a look his father had given her. By the time they'd arrived, she'd be in a mood, and Daniel would spend the whole visit managing her emotions instead of connecting with his family. Eventually, he started making excuses not to go. His relationship with his mother, which had always been close, deteriorated. She could sense something was wrong, but Daniel couldn't admit it. He defended his wife, made excuses for her, told himself his mother just didn't understand. The thing about isolation is that it's invisible until you need someone. You don't realize how alone you are until you in crisis and look around, and there's no one there. Within 2 years, Daniel's entire support system had evaporated. The only person left was her, which of course was exactly the point. As Daniel became more isolated, her behavior escalated. The emotional outburst became more frequent and more severe. She'd rage for hours, then switch to cold silence for days. Daniel never knew which version of her he'd come home to. He developed a habit of sitting in his car for 10 minutes before entering the apartment, trying to prepare himself for whatever was waiting inside. She started tracking his location through his phone, reading his emails, showing up unannounced at his workplace to surprise him. Though it felt more like surveillance, the accusations of infidelity became constant. Even though Daniel had never been unfaithful, she'd construct elaborate narratives from nothing. A name mentioned in passing, a receipt from a restaurant she didn't recognize. Every innocent action became evidence of betrayal in her mind. And then the physical intimidation began. She never hit him. Not at first. But she'd throw things, break things, get in his face, screaming, daring him to react, push him, block doorways so he couldn't leave. Once she locked him out of the apartment at 2 a.m. in his underwear because she'd convinced herself he was hiding something on his phone. Daniel, a grown man who could have physically overpowered her easily, felt helpless because what was he supposed to do? Push her back? Call the police? Who would believe him? He also learned that she knew exactly where the line was. She'd push right up to the edge of what could be called physical abuse without technically crossing it. And if he ever tried to restrain her to stop her from throwing something or to get past her, blocking a door, she'd scream that he was hurting her, that he was the abuser. The threat was implicit but clear. If this ever became public, she would be the victim, not him. Here's what Daniel says is the hardest part to explain. Why he didn't just leave. Men aren't supposed to be victims. That's what society tells us. Men are strong. Men protect. Men don't get abused by women. And if they do, they must have done something to deserve it. Or they're weak. Or they're lying. Daniel couldn't tell anyone what was happening. He was ashamed. He was embarrassed. He'd been raised to believe that a man's job was to handle things. And here he was unable to handle his own marriage. When he imagined telling his friends, "My wife screams at me for hours, tracks my location, goes through my phone," he imagined their disbelief, their judgment, the jokes they'd make. Just leave. Just stand up to her. What's wrong with you? So he stayed silent. And in that silence, he stayed trapped. He also blamed himself. He'd replay every conflict, wondering what he could have done differently. If he just remembered to text her about the meeting, if he'd just not mentioned his coworker's name, if he'd just been more attentive, more careful, more perfect, maybe she wouldn't react like this. This is the trap of abuse. The victim starts to believe they're causing it. That if they could just be better, the abuse would stop. That somewhere, somehow they're doing something wrong. Daniel didn't see himself as a victim. Victims were other people. He was just someone in a difficult marriage who needed to try harder. Victims of abuse often believe they're the problem. Daniel was no different. By year 3, Daniel's entire existence was organized around avoiding her triggers. He didn't make decisions anymore. He calculated them. Every choice, what to say, when to say it, how to phrase it, was filtered through one question. Will this set her off? He stopped expressing opinions. He stopped having preferences. He became agreeable to the point of non-existence because disagreement was dangerous. His performance at work suffered. He couldn't concentrate. He was always anxious, always checking his phone, always bracing for the next accusation. Colleagues noticed something was wrong, but didn't ask. Men don't talk about these things. Daniel developed physical symptoms. Insomnia, weight loss, a constant knot in his stomach that never fully unwound. His doctor asked if he was under stress. He said work was busy. He didn't mention that he dreaded going home more than any deadline. The man who'd been confident, successful, and connected was now a shadow of himself. He'd been erased piece by piece until there was almost nothing left. The worst part, Daniel says, was that he couldn't even remember who he used to be. The version of himself that had existed before her, confident, social, optimistic, seemed like a different person entirely, someone from a past life. He wondered if that person could ever come back or if she had destroyed him permanently. The end came not through a dramatic realization, but through exhaustion. After a particularly brutal episode, 3 days of accusations, screaming, thrown objects, and no sleep, Daniel looked in the mirror and didn't recognize himself. He was gaunt. His eyes were hollow. He looked, he says, like someone who was dying. And in that moment, something clicked. He thought, if I stay here, I will actually die. Maybe not physically, but the person I used to be is already dead, and whatever's left won't survive much longer. He told her he wanted a divorce. He expected anger. He expected rage. He expected the worst explosion yet. What he got was worse. What followed was the most terrifying period of his life. She didn't accept his decision. She didn't grieve or negotiate or let him go. She declared war. First came the threats. If he left, she'd destroy him. Tell everyone he was abusive. Make sure no one would ever believe his side of the story. Then came the action. She contacted his employer with accusations, nothing specific enough to be actionable, but enough to create suspicion and discomfort. His workplace, not wanting the liability, suggested he take a leave of absence while things settled down. She reached out to his arranged friends and family, spinning stories about his behavior. Some believed her, others didn't know what to believe. The support system he'd already lost became even more distant. She showed up at places she knew he'd be, sat in her car outside his new apartment, sent dozens of messages a day, alternating between rage and pleading. The harassment was relentless. Daniel considered going to the police, but he'd heard enough stories. A man claiming a woman is harassing him. The skepticism would be immediate. And if she counterclaimed, said he was the aggressor, who would they believe? He felt trapped even after escape. The legal system offered no protection. Restraining orders require evidence of physical threat. Psychological harassment, the constant messages, the showing up, the contact with his employer didn't meet the threshold. He was told to document everything. But documentation doesn't stop someone from ruining your life in the meantime. Daniel learned something important during this period. The systems that are supposed to protect people from abuse are designed with a specific type of victim in mind. And he didn't fit the profile. Eventually, things calmed down. She found a new target. Daniel heard through mutual acquaintances that she had moved on to someone else within months, repeating the same pattern. Fast commitment, intense connection. He felt sorry for the new guy. Daniel left his job not because he was fired, but because the environment had been poisoned. He moved to a different city, started over. The rebuilding was slow. He reconnected with his parents, though those relationships never fully recovered. He made new friends, though he held them at a distance. He went to therapy, which helped him understand what had happened and why he'd stayed so long. But some things didn't heal. Daniel still has nightmares sometimes. He still flinches when his phone buzzes unexpectedly. He still feels a spike of anxiety when a woman raises her voice, even if it's not directed at him. The therapist told him this is normal. That trauma lives in the body, not just the mind. That recovery isn't a straight line, and some things may never fully go away. Daniel is 43 now. He hasn't been in a serious relationship since. He's dated, but as soon as things start to feel close, he finds reasons to pull back. The fear is still there, not of her specifically, but of what intimacy can become, of how wrong his judgment was, of how easily he could miss the signs again. He says he's made peace with the possibility that he'll be alone. It's not what he wanted. It's not the life he imagined for himself when he was 34 and thought he'd found the love of his life. But it feels safer than the alternative. When Daniel asked me to share his story, he wanted to make sure certain things were clear. First, he doesn't hate women. His ex-wife was a specific person with specific problems. Problems that probably started long before he met her. He's learned about personality disorders, about how childhood trauma can create adults who are incapable of healthy attachment. He doesn't excuse what she did, but he understands it wasn't about him. He was a target, not a cause. Second, the warning signs were there from the beginning. The intensity, the rush to commitment, the early isolation from friends and family, the first signs of jealousy that he mistook for love. If he'd known what to look for, he might have seen it. But he didn't know. Most people don't. Third, his gut knew something was wrong before his brain did. There were moments early on when something fell off, a reaction that seemed too extreme, a question that felt like an accusation, a chill that went through him when she looked at him a certain way. He dismissed those feelings because he wanted the relationship to work, because the good times were so good that he convinced himself the bad times were anomalies. He wishes he'd listened to that quiet voice that kept saying something isn't right here. Fourth, men can be victims, too. Abuse isn't about physical strength. It's about psychological control. And anyone, regardless of gender, can be controlled if the right levers are pulled. Society doesn't want to believe this, but it's true. Daniel wanted me to share what he now recognizes as red flags. Things that seemed romantic or intense at the time, but were actually warning signs of what was coming. Love bombing. When someone showers you with attention, affection, and declarations of love very early in a relationship, be cautious. Genuine love builds over time. Intensity that feels too good to be true often is. Rushing commitment, pressure to make things official quickly. Moving in together, getting engaged, getting married before you've had time to really know each other. Healthy partners don't need to lock you down fast. Isolation tactics. Pay attention if your partner consistently creates conflict with your friends and family. If everyone in your life becomes a problem, the problem isn't everyone. Extreme jealousy. Possessiveness is not love. Needing to know where you are and who you're with at all times is not security. It's control. Emotional volatility. Extreme highs and lows, especially in a reaction to minor events, are a warning sign. Stable people don't rage for hours over forgotten errands. The apology escalation cycle. If someone hurts you, apologizes intensely, promises to change, and then does it again. That's a pattern. Words mean nothing without sustained action. Blame shifting. If every conflict becomes your fault, if you're always the one apologizing even when you didn't do anything wrong, something is deeply off. Your own shrinking. If you notice yourself becoming smaller, avoiding topics, hiding parts of your life, walking on eggshells, apologizing constantly, pay attention. Healthy relationships expand you. Toxic ones compress you until there's nothing left. Lack of accountability. Pay attention to how someone talks about their past. If every ex was crazy, if every conflict was someone else's fault, if they never seemed to take responsibility for anything, that pattern will eventually include you. Emotional punishment, silent treatment, cold withdrawal, withholding affection as a form of control. If someone punishes you emotionally for not complying with their wishes, that's not communication. It's manipulation. I'm sharing Daniel's story because it happens more than we admit. We talk about abusive relationships, but we usually imagine a specific picture. A physically violent man, a woman who can't leave. That picture is real and important. But it's not the only picture. Men can be victims. Abuse can be psychological. Control can be invisible to everyone except the person being controlled. And the scary part is how normal it looks from the outside. Daniel's neighbors saw a happy couple. His coworkers saw a man who seemed tired but fine. Nobody knew what was happening behind closed doors because Daniel was too ashamed to tell them, and because she was too careful to show her true self to anyone but him. That's the nature of this kind of abuse. It's invisible. The wounds don't show on the skin. The prison has no bars, and the person suffering often doesn't even know they a victim until they too deep in to easily escape. Daniel lost 4 years of his life to a relationship that nearly destroyed him. He lost his career trajectory, his friendships, his family connections, his health, and his ability to trust. He's still rebuilding a decade later, and he's not alone. There are men watching this right now who recognize parts of his story. Men who are in relationships like this and don't know how to name what's happening. Men who got out, but still carry the scars. If that's you, know this. It's not your fault. You're not weak. You're not stupid. You were targeted by someone who was very good at what they do. And getting out, or even just recognizing what's happening, takes tremendous courage. Daniel wants you to know that there's no shame in being a victim. The shame belongs to the person who did this to you, not to you for having been deceived. The most intelligent, capable, successful people can fall into these traps. That's by design. And if you're watching this and you recognize the patterns, but you're not in that situation, now you know what to look for. Now you know that the most dangerous partners often seem the most perfect at first. Now you know to trust your instincts when something feels wrong, even if you can't explain why. This video isn't meant to make you afraid of all relationships. Love is real. Partnership is possible. There are healthy, stable, supportive people out there, but this video is meant to make you careful. To make you listen to your gut when something feels wrong. To make you watch for patterns instead of hoping they'll change. To make you value your own well-being enough to walk away when staying means losing yourself. Daniel says, if his story saves even one person from what he went through, it was worth sharing. That's why he asked me to tell it. So, pay attention to the early signs. Trust your instincts. Don't let anyone rush you into commitment before you're ready. And remember, the most dangerous people often seem the most charming at first. They have to be. That's how they get you. Protect yourself. Know the patterns. And don't become another story like Daniel's. Because love should make your life better, not destroy it. Intimacy should feel safe, not terrifying. And commitment should be something you choose freely, not something you're manipulated into before you're ready. Daniel survived. Not everyone does. Let his story be the warning that saves you from having to live your own. If this hit you, you need to see the psychology behind why these people choose their victims. Click here to watch that next.